150 pairs of eyes turned toward me when my own daughter stopped me at the church door and said I didn't belong at my only grandson's baptism. My name is Kelly, 68 years old. I had worked my entire life to give them everything, but that day I finally understood that to them, I was nothing more than a walking ATM. What my daughter Emily didn't realize was that ATMs also have a cancel button, and I was about to press it with everything I had left. That morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, that heavy, cold silence that only exists after a woman has buried her husband and her children have moved on. But today, that silence didn't hurt me. It carried a strange kind of anticipation. Today was my grandson Sam's baptism, my greatest joy, my little piece of heaven who had been with us for 6 months. I stood in front of the mirror for nearly an hour getting ready. I'd bought myself a dark blue dress, made from fine fabric, expensive but worth every dollar for the occasion. I brushed my hair carefully to hide the stubborn gray strands and put on the pearl necklace my late husband, Robert, had given me for our 30th wedding anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone beautiful, someone who mattered. It's a big day, Kelly, I told myself out loud for courage. Today you'll be with your family. My heart was pounding as I left the house. I called a familiar taxi service because I didn't want the stress of driving. As the car moved through the city streets, I thought about everything I'd done for this day, and it was no small list. When Emily and her husband Mark said they wanted to hold a baptism for their baby, they immediately complained about not having enough money. Mark was always chasing business ventures that never went anywhere, while Emily had a decent job but spent far beyond her means. So, like always, Mom stepped in to save the day. "Don't worry. I'll handle it," I'd told them 2 months earlier. "I'll take care of the venue, the food, and the souvenirs. My grandson deserves the best." I paid for the most luxurious event venue in the city, the one with the large garden and fountains. I covered catering for 150 people, even though it was supposed to be 50, but Mark's guest list kept growing. "All business partners," he said, flashing that smile I'd never liked. And I, foolishly, wrote the checks for everything, including the imported linen baptism gown that cost more than my dress. The taxi stopped in front of St. Jude's Church. Outside, there were luxury cars everywhere and elegantly dressed people I didn't recognize. I felt uneasy. Who were these people? I looked for familiar faces from my family but saw none. Strange. I climbed the stone steps slowly. My knees weren't what they used to be leaning on my carved wooden cane. The sound of the organ drifted from inside. I was right on time. In the foyer, I spotted Emily. She looked beautiful, I won't deny it. She wore a cream dress, her hair neatly pinned up, and she was holding baby Sam. Mark stood beside her, chatting animatedly with a group of men in suits. Pride filled me. That was my blood, my family. I walked toward them with a bright smile, ready to greet them and join the service. "Emily," I called, raising my hand. She turned. The smile vanished instantly. Her eyes were not welcoming, they were annoyed, as if I were a stain on her perfect new dress. She whispered something to Mark, handed him the baby, and walked quickly toward me, blocking my way at the door. "What are you doing here, Mom?" she asked quietly but coldly. For a moment, I froze. "What do you mean? What am I doing here? It's Sam's baptism. I'm his grandmother." Emily glanced around nervously, as if my presence embarrassed her. "Listen, there was a mix-up with the seating," she said, folding her arms. "The front rows are reserved, and Mark insisted we prioritize his guests." "Prioritize?" I repeated, as if it were a word from a foreign language. "Honey, I'm your mother. I paid for the venue, the food, the baby's outfit." "I know, Mom, and I appreciate it," she interrupted quickly, "but Mark invited business partners, very important people, politicians, influencers, people who can help us move up socially." A chill twisted in my stomach. "Are you saying I can't go in?" My voice shook. Emily sighed. "There's no room, Mom. All the seats are taken. Look, it's full inside." Through the open doors, I saw Mark's parents seated proudly in the front row. They hadn't paid a single dime. I could see there was still standing room near the back. I can stand, I pleaded softly. My God, I was begging just to witness my grandson's baptism. No, Mom, she cut me off. It wouldn't look good. And at the reception, there's no seat for you either. The tables are set by groups. You don't know anyone, you'll be bored, and then you'll get a headache, and I'll have to take care of you. It's better if you go home and rest. It felt like being slapped. No, worse, a knife straight to the heart. 150 strangers would eat my food, drink my wine, and celebrate with my money, while I was turned away like I didn't matter at all. People brushed past me to enter, some glancing curiously at the well-dressed old woman frozen in the doorway. I heard laughter. From afar, I saw Mark laughing with a man wearing a gold watch. He didn't even look my way. Something inside me shattered, but silently. Years of patience, forgiveness, and excuses for Emily's selfishness all broke at once. I looked straight into my daughter's eyes. She expected me to cry, to cause a scene, or to walk away like always. Gentle Kelly, the forgiving grandma. I took a deep breath. The air reeked of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. All right, honey, I said, my voice strangely calm. Emily exhaled in relief. Thank you for understanding, Mom. You're amazing. I'll stop by tomorrow and tell you all about it. I'll bring cake. She kissed my cheek lightly, barely a touch, and turned away. The heavy wooden doors closed, and the first notes of Ave Maria floated through the crack. I stood alone in the stone foyer. The noon sun hit my face, but I felt frozen. My feet hurt from the new shoes, and my heart ached even more. I walked slowly down the steps. I didn't cry. My eyes were dry. The taxi was gone, so I walked 2 blocks to call another. On the way home, I didn't let myself feel sad. Sadness was a luxury I couldn't afford. Sadness paralyzes you, and I needed action. I began thinking in numbers. Business had been my life, from selling rolls out of a basket to owning 3 industrial bakeries and several downtown properties. I'd been widowed young and built it all alone while raising Emily. She had never known what it was like to wake up at 3 a.m., to knead dough, to argue with suppliers, or to count every dollar for the electric bill. She only knew private schools, designer clothes, and beach vacations. That was my mistake, raising a spoiled queen on a silver platter. And Mark? Mark was a leech with a degree, who married her because he smelled inheritance. When I got home, the silence greeted me again. I took off my shoes at the door and walked to my office, a small room with an old desk, a computer, and stacks of files. I sat in Robert's leather chair and checked the clock. It was 12:30. The ceremony would last an hour, then everyone would move to the Crystal Palace Event Center. The reception was scheduled to start at 2. I had an hour and a half. I pulled out my old black address book, the one Emily always told me to throw away because everything's on the phone. But inside were the important numbers. I found Mr. Newman, my financial advisor. I dialed. Hello. His raspy voice answered after 2 rings. Mrs. Kelly? I thought you were at the baptism. There's been a change of plans, I said. I'm home and need to take care of some urgent matters. Go ahead, he replied. Cancel the check for the event venue, the large one, the remaining balance for the reception. Silence. Then he cleared his throat. That's a very large amount. If we cancel now, they might not serve the food. Exactly what I want. But are you sure? It's your grandson's event. There's no family there, only 150 strangers and 2 ungrateful people. Also cancel the payments to the decoration and music companies. And freeze all the secondary credit cards under my name that my daughter uses. Immediately. I can do that from the banking app, I added. And the office property on Central Avenue where Mark runs his so-called consulting business, prepare a termination notice for Monday morning. No more free rent. If he wants an office, he can pay for it. This is war, he said with a nervous chuckle. No, I replied calmly. This is education. A lesson I should have taught 20 years ago. One more thing, call Richard, the venue manager. Tell him the payment wasn't approved by me, the account holder. If they want their money, they can collect it from the hosts, Mark and Emily. Call before the reception begins. I looked out the window. The sky was bright blue. I removed my pearl necklace and set it on the desk. My neck felt lighter than it had in years. Better than ever. I hung up, leaned back in Robert's chair, and closed my eyes. I pictured 150 guests arriving at the Crystal Palace, waiters standing still, the manager holding a bill and walking toward Mark. My heart, which had been shriveled moments ago, began to beat steadily again. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, just the way I liked it, and grabbed a few leftover cookies from the night before. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, I didn't feel rejected anymore. I felt powerful. For years, I'd been the quiet shadow behind the scenes, the one who signed the checks and stayed silent not to bother anyone. I had allowed them to disrespect me right in front of my face, thinking that was what love looked like. But a mother's love isn't a doormat for others to wipe their shoes on. Love also means correcting what's gone wrong, and I was about to. My phone buzzed. A message in the family group chat. Someone had sent a photo, unaware I wasn't there. In the picture, Emily and Mark were raising champagne glasses, smiling like victors. The caption read, "What a wonderful party. Thank you for everything." The house phone started ringing. Then my cell phone. Emily's photo flashed on the screen. I let it ring, again and again. The sound of the ringtone mixed with the smell of fresh coffee. I didn't answer. It rang again, Mark this time. I still didn't answer. Then Emily again. I picked up the phone, switched it to silent, and placed it face down on the table. I took a sip of coffee. Perfectly balanced sweetness. I imagined the chaos erupting at the event hall, the public humiliation they had tried so hard to spare me now coming back 100-fold. "There's no place for you, Mom." Her words echoed in my head. They were right. There was no place for me in the fake, glittering world they'd built. But in my world, in my reality, I was the one holding the chessboard and I had just declared checkmate. I finished my coffee calmly, went to my bedroom, took off the fancy dress, and slipped into my soft cotton robe. I felt comfortable. I felt like myself. The landline kept ringing, that desperate sound, until I unplugged it. Standing by the window, I watched a neighbor walking their dog. Outside, everything looked normal, but I knew that across town, inside a luxurious banquet hall, my daughter's world was collapsing. And the truth was, this was only the beginning. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow they'd come demanding answers, yelling or begging for money to pay the venue debt. But tomorrow, they'd meet a different Kelly, the one who built everything from nothing. I lay down and closed my eyes. I needed rest. Tomorrow would be busy. I slept with a smile, knowing that the silent phone in the kitchen was full of desperate messages I'd read only when I felt like it. They'd wanted exclusivity now, they had a mess entirely of their own. I slept soundly, without pills, without worry about whether Emily could make her car payment or whether Mark would ever close one of his ridiculous deals. I slept with the peace of someone who had finally set down a burden that was never theirs to carry. When I woke, the gentle Sunday light filtered through the curtains. Habit woke me early, the habit of a baker, even if I no longer needed dough. The house was completely quiet, but this time it wasn't empty. It was clean, peaceful. I slipped on my slippers and went straight to the kitchen. I plugged the landline back in. Almost immediately, the red light on the answering machine blinked rapidly, over 20 new messages. I glanced at my cell phone, still face down on the table. More than 50 missed calls and hundreds of messages in the family chat. I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea with honey, slowly. I sat in my favorite armchair, adjusted my glasses, and decided it was time to assess the damage, not with fear, but with the curiosity of a scientist observing what happens when you take away someone's favorite drug. The first voicemail was from Emily. She asked what was wrong with me, said the manager claimed the card wouldn't process, that everyone was raising glasses, and begged me to answer before I embarrassed her. The next one was from Mark, his voice shaking with barely contained anger, the fake politeness he used when trying to manipulate me. He said, "It must be a bank error," asked me to call Mr. Newman immediately because the main courses were being withheld and guests were asking questions. After that, The messages lost all civility. They called me selfish, asked how I could do this. They said they had to pass around a hat among the godparents to pay the cork fee. Guests were leaving. Emily screamed that I had ruined her life. Behind her voice, I could hear Sam crying, my poor grandson, caught in that toxic storm. I listened to each voicemail, the shouting, the tears, even the empty threats of lawsuits, as if they could sue me for my own money. And finally, when the night must have ended, there was only silence. I smiled, took another sip of tea, then stood up. I needed to know exactly where I stood. I went to my office, where all the papers Emily had never bothered to read were kept. I pulled out a blue folder, property deeds and loan documents. For years, every time they had an emergency or wanted something new, I'd signed. But Robert, my late husband, had always taught me one rule: help your family, but never give away your home. Let the papers speak. I started reading, rediscovering the power I'd forgotten I had. First, the house they lived in, a beautiful property in a gated community. Emily always said it was her house, her garden. But the deed clearly had my name on it. I had let them live there rent-free under a temporary loan agreement until their finances improved. Years had passed, and nothing had improved because they'd never needed to. Second, Mark's SUV, the shiny new one he bragged about as proof of his success. I had paid the down payment, and the monthly installments came automatically from my savings account, listed as transportation support for the baby. Third, the credit cards. I logged into my online banking, put on my glasses to see the numbers clearly. The secondary card I had given Emily meant for baby emergencies only. On the bank statement were charges for a spa, a high-end fashion boutique, a sushi restaurant, and then a golf store. Mark didn't even play golf. I felt a sting in my chest. Not pain, shame. Shame for myself. How could I have been so blind, letting them treat me with such contempt for so long? I stood up and walked to the large mirror in the hallway. I saw a 68-year-old woman. The wrinkles on my face were a map of a lifetime of labor. I looked at my hands. Though they were now well cared for, they still carried the strength of someone who had once lifted sacks of flour weighing more than 110 pounds. "They underestimated you, Kelly," I said to the reflection. "They see you as an old money machine. They think you're weak because you're generous. But they forgot whose blood runs in their veins." I remembered the early days with Robert. We had nothing, just a thin mattress on the floor behind our first bakery. When I was pregnant with Emily, I worked right up to the day I gave birth. My water broke while serving a customer, and a few days later, I was back at the register with baby Emily sleeping in a crib beside the oven. I built this fortune with sweat, tears, and brains. I negotiated with ruthless suppliers who tried to crush me because I was a woman. I survived recessions, betrayals, unfair competition. And now an arrogant son-in-law and a spoiled daughter had dared to say there was no place for me. My anger hardened into strategy, a cold, sharp focus. The same feeling I used to get before closing a major business deal. My mind was crystal clear. I returned to my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and began to write a list. Not a shopping list, a correction list. The house. 30 days to move out or start paying rent at market rate. The car. Must be returned immediately, or I'll report it stolen. Mark's so-called consulting company, out of my property effective immediately. The inheritance. Call the notary on Monday to change the will. When I reached the inheritance line, I paused. Crossing out my only child's name was the heaviest thing I'd ever done. But I remembered her eyes the day before, that look of disdain when she said they had to prioritize important people. So now I would prioritize my own dignity. The doorbell rang, not a normal ring, but a long, impatient buzz followed by pounding. Emily shouted my name, saying she knew I was home. I glanced at the clock. They were later than I expected, probably too drunk or too busy arguing. I didn't rush. I closed the folder, adjusted my robe, put water on to boil, and only then walked to the door. I opened it. They were standing there. Emily's eyes were swollen, her makeup from the day before smeared across her cheeks. Mark stood behind her, clothes wrinkled, unshaven, his face twisted with irritation. The baby was nowhere in sight, Emily screamed, demanding what on earth I'd been thinking, and pushed her way inside. She shouted that I had humiliated them, that they'd been forced to pawn Mark's watch, the one his parents had given him. I greeted them with a calm, "Good morning," my voice in sharp contrast to her shouting. I stepped aside. "Come in. The tea's almost ready." They stormed in like a tornado, bringing chaos with them. Straight to the living room, Mark threw himself onto the sofa, propping his shoes on the coffee table like he always did. I told him to take his feet off because the table was made of fine wood and scratched easily. He gave an awkward laugh but obeyed, staring at me as if I'd grown another head. Emily paced back and forth, waving her hands. She told me to stop pretending nothing was wrong, that I had to fix this. Richard, the event manager, had given them until noon tomorrow to pay in full or face a lawsuit nearly $10,000, she emphasized, and that I needed to transfer the money immediately, plus extra for their emotional distress in front of the guests. I sat down, crossed my legs, and looked at them. They truly believed this was just another one of my tantrums. That, I would cry. They would yell a little, and I'd pull out my checkbook to buy peace again. "I'm not paying a single dollar," I said. The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. Mark leaned forward, his tone threatening, the way he spoke when he thought he was in control. He told me to be reasonable, that I had made a verbal agreement. I looked him straight in the eye. That agreement was for my grandson's baptism, a family event. But yesterday, you both made it very clear it wasn't a family event, it was a networking event. And I don't fund business ventures, especially not yours, Mark, since yours have never made a profit. Mark's face flushed red. He jumped up, warning me to watch my mouth, and boasting that I didn't understand modern business, that all his contacts were high level. I replied, "Those contacts of yours are nothing but users in expensive suits just like you." The words came out sharp and clean. Emily gasped, telling me not to speak to her husband that way, and accusing me of losing my mind because of my age. I shrugged. Maybe. They say age brings wisdom, but sometimes it just brings clarity. And yesterday, in front of that church, I saw things very clearly. You told me there was no place for me, that I was an eyesore, an inconvenience for your social media photos. Emily's tone softened instantly, switching to the victim role when she saw her attack wasn't working. "We just wanted everything to be perfect, Mom. Please understand us. We're under so much pressure." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You wanted a perfect party funded by your imperfect mother. You wanted luxury without the old woman who paid for it. Fine. Your wish has been granted. The old woman is gone, and so is the money." I stood, walked to my desk, and returned with a blue folder. I dropped it onto the coffee table. The sound was sharp, final. "What's that?" Emily asked warily. "Reality," I said. "Your reality." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the deed to the house you're living in. As you know, it's in my name. Starting Monday, my attorney will terminate your free occupancy agreement. You have 1 month to move out or sign a rental contract. Rent is $2,000 a month, market rate for that neighborhood." Emily turned pale, gripping the back of the sofa to keep from falling. "You're throwing us out on the street with a baby? He's your grandson." "I'm not throwing anyone out. You'll still have a roof over your heads. You'll just have to pay for it, like responsible adults. And as for my grandson, don't worry. If you can't take proper care of him, I'll apply for temporary custody to make sure he has everything he needs. I love him. I'll protect him. But for you two, the game is over." Mark began to tremble, not from anger, but from fear. He knew without my house, without my money, his paper castle would collapse overnight. "Kelly, please," he stammered. "We can't afford that rent. You know my projects are about to take off. I just need more time." "Time's up, Mark. You've had 8 years. I pulled out another paper. "And one more thing. I need the keys to the SUV." "What? That's my car," he shouted. "No, Mark. Read the documents. The car is mine. I bought it. I pay the insurance. I pay the taxes. You just drive it. And considering you left your mother-in-law standing outside a church, walking a bit might do wonders for your health and your humility." I extended my hand, palm up. "Keys." Mark looked at Emily. She lowered her head, silently crying not out of regret, but defeat. She realized the golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs, it had turned into an eagle, ready to strike back. "I'm not giving you anything," Mark yelled in a final act of wounded pride. "This is theft. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, pointing at the phone. "I have all the invoices under my name, the ownership papers too. When the police arrive, they'll see a man trying to steal property from an elderly woman. Who do you think they'll arrest?" Mark clenched his fists, his face contorted with rage. For a split second, I felt danger. He was young and strong. I was not. He stepped forward. "You miserable old woman," he hissed. My survival instinct, the one sharpened by years in markets, facing thieves and scammers, kicked in immediately. I didn't back away. I stood tall, lifted my chin, and met his glare with ice. "Try it," I said quietly. "Touch me once, Mark, and I swear on my husband's soul I won't just take back the house and the car. I'll have you in prison, and I'll make sure you'll never show your face in this city again. I have money and connections to make that happen. Go on, try me." We stood locked in a silent standoff. His breathing grew ragged. Finally, Mark lowered his eyes, reached into his pocket, pulled out the keychain, and threw it hard at my feet. "Keep your damn pile of junk," he spat. "Pick it up," I said. "What?" "Pick up the keys and hand them to me. I'm not your maid. In my house, we show respect." Mark stared at the keys on the floor, then at Emily, hoping for support, but Emily was slumped on the sofa, utterly defeated. Slowly, burning with humiliation, his ears turning red, Mark bent down, his knees cracking, picked up the keys, and slapped them into my hand. "Get out," I said, gripping the cold metal. "Don't come back until you have a serious proposal about paying back what you owe me. Oh, and Emily, next Sunday is my birthday. Don't bother coming. I'll be celebrating with people who actually love me." Mark grabbed Emily by the arm and nearly dragged her out. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on the walls. I stood alone again in the hallway. My legs, steady as oak a moment ago, began to tremble from the leftover adrenaline. I sat down on the chair in the foyer, staring at the keys in my hand and the blue folder on the table. It had begun. There was no turning back. I had declared war on my own daughter, my own blood. It hurt, of course it did. A single tear rolled down my cheek, but at the same time my chest felt lighter, as if fresh air had finally entered my lungs. I was in control, but I knew this wasn't over. Mark was vindictive and stupid, a dangerous combination, and Emily would be desperate to cling to her social standing. They would find a way. They might try to use the baby to manipulate me, or claim I was mentally unfit. I needed protection. I needed an army. I picked up the phone, scrolled through my old contacts, and found the number labeled the Lionesses. That was what we called our group, retired businesswomen who had each built empires and been dismissed by society simply for aging. I hadn't seen them in years, ever since Emily said they were a bad influence and not refined enough. I dialed Teresa, the former owner of the biggest hardware chain in the South. "Teresa, it's Kelly." "Yes, Kelly from the bakery. I'm still alive. Listen, I need to call a meeting." "Yes, all of us. I have a plan, and I'll need everyone's help. We're about to teach the world a lesson, and in the process, I'm taking my life back. Meet me at the downtown cafe in 1 hour." I hung up, wiped away the single tear I'd allowed myself, and went to my dressing room. No more house robe. I put on a sharp suit, deep red lipstick, and my best pair of heels. The sweet old grandmother had clocked out. The commander was back. As I left the house to meet my new war council, I didn't yet know that Mark was already on the phone with a sleazy lawyer, plotting to have me declared mentally incompetent. The battle had only begun, and they were going to play dirty. What they didn't know was that I was the one who had invented the game. The downtown cafe smelled of history, polished wood, and freshly ground coffee. Time seemed to slow there, but it was where the city's most important deals had always been made. I walked in that Sunday morning, my heels clicking against the checkered marble floor. Inside, they were already waiting at the back table, the quietest corner, beneath an old oil painting of the city's founding day. My lionesses. Teresa, with her neatly cropped silver hair and eyes sharp as an eagle's. Madeline, a former attorney and the first female judge in the state, known for her steel discipline. And Sophia, the widow of a diplomat. She knew the secrets of every prominent family better than any priest in town. "You're late, Kelly," Teresa said, glancing at her watch but smiling warmly. "We already ordered your cinnamon cappuccino." I sat down, setting my bag on the table, exhaling the weight of the last 24 hours. "I had to take out the trash before coming," I said, referring to Mark and Emily. "We figured," Madeline said, adjusting her glasses. "Word travels fast." Sophia said that yesterday at the Crystal Palace Event Center, there had been a scene worthy of television when the staff stopped pouring wine. People said Mark's face turned red as he yelled at the manager. Sophia nodded, her tone still elegant. My source said it was a disaster. Guests whispered that Mark's card was declined 3 times. Some were so hungry they went out to get burgers. Quite disgraceful. I felt both satisfaction and sadness. Sad, because Emily still carried my last name. But satisfied, because the lesson had begun. "I didn't come here to gossip," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "I came to talk about war. I need to protect myself. Mark has threatened me, implied that I'm losing my mind." The cafe table fell silent. Madeline leaned forward, her eyes shifting from friend to strategist. "The mental incompetence card," she said in a low voice. "A classic move of parasitic children when the money supply is cut off. They'll find a dirty doctor to sign a diagnosis of early dementia and petition the court to strip you of your rights. If it works, Mark becomes your legal guardian, controlling your money, your property, and your freedom." A chill ran down my spine. I pictured Mark in control of my life, locking me in a cheap nursing home while he squandered my fortune on his useless projects. "I won't allow that," I said firmly. "Of course not," Teresa said, resting her ring-covered hand on the table. "Kelly, you built 3 bakeries while you were breastfeeding. You're the sanest person we know." "Madeline," I said, "I need you to handle the legal defense." "I've already thought about it," she replied. "Monday morning we'll meet with Dr. Anderson, the most trusted psychiatrist in the state courts. You'll take a voluntary, full evaluation, and he'll notarize that you're perfectly competent. With that document, any attempt by Mark will backfire and turn into a defamation lawsuit. And I," Sophia added, "will handle the social side. Mark thinks his connections will save him. Poor fool. Those are friends of his money, not of him. I'll make a few discreet calls. By Tuesday, no club will return his calls. He'll be a pariah." "Thank you, all of you," I said, my eyes stinging. This was loyalty. This was family, the kind I chose. We spent the next 2 hours drafting plans. It wasn't a chat. It was a board meeting. We reviewed assets, analyzed legal vulnerabilities, and prepared contingencies. When I left the cafe, I was no longer a lonely victim. I was a general standing with her war counsel. Monday morning was gray, the sky heavy as if the whole city knew a storm was coming. I stood before the mirror at 7 a.m. Charcoal gray suit, white silk blouse, pearls, no trace of the gentle grandmother. Today I was Kelly the businesswoman. The first destination was Dr. Anderson's clinic. Madeline came with me. The evaluation was long and exhausting. They tested memory, logic, math, emotional stability. In the end, the doctor, a silver-haired, stern man, signed the certification with a decisive stroke. "Mrs. Kelly, your mind is sharper than most of my 40-year-old patients. You are fully competent, well-oriented, and have exceptional cognitive ability. Anyone claiming otherwise is lying." I left with the paper in my purse like carrying a diamond shield. Meanwhile, my other maneuvers were already taking effect. My phone buzzed with an alert from the security company monitoring the office space on Central Avenue, Mark's so-called consultancy. The report said there had been an unauthorized attempt to unlock the smart lock. It had activated the alarm. I smiled. Sunday night, I had all the codes and mechanical locks changed through an emergency service. I imagined the scene and then decided imagining wasn't enough. I wanted to see it myself. I told the driver to take me to Central Avenue. I got out at the cafe across the street, ordered tea, and watched through the large glass window. Mark was pounding on the glass door, yelling into his phone, gesturing furiously. The young secretary beside him clutched a box, her face flushed with shame. Two men in suits walked up, probably clients. Mark turned to them with his usual fake smile, pointing at the door, pretending it was a technical problem. Just then, a police car pulled up. My heart tightened. Mark had called them. How stupid. The officers approached, and Mark started shouting, demanding they open the door. They calmly asked for identification. He handed over his wallet. They checked their tablet, then one officer shook his head and handed Mark a paper. It was a formal termination notice and demand to vacate documents Madeline had prepared and had officially served that morning, hours before Mark even woke up. I saw his shoulders collapse. The two clients exchanged looks and walked away, leaving Mark with the police. The secretary handed him the keys, said something I couldn't hear, and left toward the bus stop, abandoning him before his closed business empire. I took a sip of tea. It was cold now, but it tasted like victory. At noon, I went to the bank, not my usual branch, but the headquarters that managed my business accounts. The regional director, Mr. Parker, came out personally to greet me. He knew I handled large transactions. I asked only for water and requested a change in authorized signatories on both my bakery accounts and my personal accounts. We went into his office. As I signed the papers revoking the authorizations I'd given Emily years ago, my phone rang. It was Emily. I let it ring. Then again. On the fourth call, I answered and put it on speaker so I could keep signing. Emily was sobbing. She said she was at the supermarket, cart full of diapers and groceries, and her card had been declined insufficient funds or blocked. People were staring. I apologized calmly and told her all secondary cards had been canceled since Saturday. She screamed that she needed diapers for Sam, had no cash. Mark wasn't answering, and begged me not to do this right now. A sharp ache ran through my chest. My maternal instinct screamed to help her. But I remembered the humiliation of Saturday, the words, "There's no place for you." She had let her mother be cast out like a beggar. If I gave in now, everything would lose its meaning. She needed to feel the weight of reality. "Emily, you're 35 years old," I said. "If you don't have money, leave the cart and go home or call your husband. He's the breadwinner, remember?" The big businessman. She shouted that I was a monster, that Mark had been right, that I was insane, and hung up. My hand trembled slightly over the papers. Mr. Parker pretended not to notice, but I saw respect in his eyes. He had seen many parents destroyed by entitled children. "Everything all right, Mrs. Kelly?" he asked softly. "Everything's perfect," I replied. "I'm just pruning the family tree. Sometimes you have to cut a few branches to keep the trunk from rotting." I left the bank lighter, but also harder. The indirect battle was working. Their lives were in chaos because I had pulled back the protective hand. Around 4 p.m., I arrived home, emotionally drained. I took off my shoes and sat in the living room. Just then, I heard screeching tires outside, then loud pounding on the door. "Not the bell fists." Mark's voice roared, filled with rage and desperation, and reeking of alcohol. I peeked through the window. Mark wasn't alone. Beside him was a man in a white lab coat carrying a case, and two burly men in green paramedic uniforms. A private ambulance was parked behind the SUV he'd managed to reclaim using a spare key. I hadn't known he had my mistake. Mark shouted that he knew I was inside, that he had brought a doctor to take me for my own good, claiming I was having a psychotic episode. My heart pounded. They were actually doing it, a medical coup. They wanted to drug me, lock me up, and seize control before my legal defenses took effect. A dirty, desperate move. If they managed to inject me and place me in a facility of their choice, they could keep me sedated long enough to get a judge's signature. The banging grew louder. The man in the coat identified himself as Dr. Miller, saying Mark had called because he was worried, and that if I didn't open, they'd have to force entry under medical emergency, It wasn't a loophole at all, just a lie they planned to use as an excuse. I ran to my office. My hands shook, but my mind stayed sharp thanks to the lioness's advice. I called Madeline. I told her they were outside with an ambulance and wanted to break in. She told me not to open the door, that she was calling the police and heading over, and to record everything, don't let them touch me. I turned on my camera. I stood behind the door. The wood began to crack. Mark was kicking it. He yelled to the medics that I was insane and dangerous, that they should restrain me as soon as they entered. I backed down the hallway, truly afraid. 3 young men against a 68-year-old woman. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. Mark charged in first, eyes bloodshot, reeking of cheap whiskey. Behind him came the fake doctor and the 2 medics. Mark pointed at me, panting, shouting for them to grab me. They advanced. I screamed at the top of my lungs, holding up my phone, shouting that this was illegal entry and that I was live streaming. The doctor hesitated, covering his face, but Mark shoved him and barked orders. One of the men lunged forward, his rough hand clamping onto my wrist, pain shooting through my joints. I struggled and shouted, "Let go of me." He laughed, saying it was just a small shot to help me sleep. The other pulled out a needle. Panic exploded in my chest. They were about to sedate me. I called Mark's name, looked straight into his eyes, and told him if he did this, he'd never be forgiven, that he'd rot in prison. Mark sneered, saying I was the one who'd rot in a psychiatric ward while he managed my money. The needle moved closer. Then, sirens loud, multiple, right outside. Police cars. The wailing filled the house through the broken door. The 2 men froze. The doctor turned pale, stuffing the syringe into his pocket. Mark shouted at them to keep going. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker from the street, ordering everyone to come out with hands raised, announcing the house was surrounded. Mark ran to the window, his triumphant face twisting into panic. I seized the moment. With unexpected strength, I twisted free with everything I had. He screamed and released me. I ran to my office and locked the door. I heard shouting, boots stomping inside, Madeline's commanding voice citing legal grounds and ordering Mark's arrest for attempted unlawful restraint, assault, and property damage. I slid down to the floor, back against the door, heart pounding painfully, too close. But when I heard the metallic click of handcuffs in my own living room and Mark screaming it was all a mistake, I knew the silent phase was over. The storm had broken. I took Dr. Anderson's certificate from my purse and held it to my chest. That paper was my lifeline. Mark wanted war, wanted to show power. Now he would learn what real power was, not brute force, but law, and the strength of a mother who refuses to be a victim. I stood up, straightened my suit, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and opened the office door to witness my son-in-law in handcuffs. The metallic clicks echoed sharp and final. Click, click. I had never imagined hearing that sound in my own living room, let alone seeing it meant for the father of my grandson. But there Mark was, face pressed to the wooden floor he'd once dirtied with his arrogance, while an officer read him his rights in a calm, steady voice that contrasted with his frantic shouting, calling himself a respected businessman and calling me insane. Madeline, my friend and lawyer, entered the room like a general reclaiming captured territory, stepping over broken pieces of the door without looking down. She adjusted her glasses and pointed at the fake doctor cornered by another officer. "Officer," she said, her tone of steel the same tone that once made prosecutors tremble when she sat on the bench, "verify the full identity of the man in the lab coat. I have reason to believe this is Dr. Miller, notorious for prescribing controlled substances in exchange for bribes. If it's him, we've just uncovered a medical manipulation ring. As for those 2 posing as paramedics, check them thoroughly. I'll bet my pension they have violent records." I stood at the doorway, phone still recording. My hands no longer shook. Fear had vanished, replaced by an icy clarity sharp as a scalpel. Looking at Mark, humiliated, beaten, sniffling, his suit wrinkled, I felt no triumph. I'm not a sadist. I felt sorrow. Sorrow that my daughter had chosen this man. Sorrow that my grandson bore his last name. But above all, I felt an immense relief. The monster who once intimidated me, who made me feel small and old, was nothing more than a schoolyard bully collapsing before real authority. "Mrs. Kelly," said the supervising sergeant, a middle-aged man with a mustache, looking at me with respect. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, adjusting my suit jacket, just shaken by the level of violence when they broke into my home. "We'll need you to come to the station to complete your statement. We have video, witnesses, and caught them in the act. This is trespassing, property damage, unlawful deprivation of liberty, and assault. With the bruising on your wrist, this man will be held for some time." Mark lifted his head from the floor at that. "Emily! Call Emily!" he shouted. "Tell her your mother set me up." They dragged him out. As he passed me, he tried to meet my eyes with hatred, but I didn't look away. When the house was finally quiet, if you could call it quiet, while police photographed the broken door and picked up the syringe from the floor, I sat on the couch. Madeline sat beside me, her warm hand holding mine. "You did perfectly, Kelly," she said. "The video you filmed is gold. It clearly shows him ordering the injection. That was premeditated." "What happens next?" I asked. "We go to the station and prepare ourselves," she said. "The emotional storm has just begun. Emily will come and she's going to explode." The police station smelled of stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and human despair. Thanks to Madeline's influence, I was seated in a private room. I had just finished signing my statement when I heard shouting from the hallway. "Where's my husband? I want to see my husband and I want to see my mother." "Mom! Mom!" It was Emily. The sergeant opened the door. Emily burst in like a storm, holding Sam wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen and red. When she saw me sitting calmly with my lawyer and a cup of tea, she froze. The room fell silent. She looked at Madeline, then at me. "Mom," her voice cracked. "What did you do? Mark said you had him thrown in jail. He said you set him up." "Sit down, Emily," I said softly, pointing to the empty chair. "I'm not sitting," she screamed, clutching the baby tighter. Sam began to cry. "I want you to withdraw the charges right now. He's the father of your grandson. How could you be so cruel? They were just trying to help you. They thought you weren't well." Madeline rose slowly. "Miss Emily," she said calmly but with authority, "choose your words carefully. Your husband didn't help anyone. He hired a suspended doctor and 2 thugs to break into a private home, drug the homeowner, and force a declaration of incompetence. That's a felony. We have video, audio, and witnesses." Emily's mouth fell open, but no words came out. She turned to me, shifting from accusation to pleading the manipulation she had always used so well. "Mom," Mark was desperate. "You cornered him with the house and the car. He was pushed too far. He acted impulsively, but he's not evil. Please, for Sam's sake. You want your grandson to grow up with his father in prison?" I looked at my grandson, his face red from crying, and my heart tightened. Then I looked at my daughter, a 35-year-old woman still behaving like a child, defending violence to protect her comfort and social standing. I stood up and walked toward her. She thought I was going to hug her, to give in. I stopped about 3 feet away. "Emily, look at me," I said. She raised her head. "On Saturday, you said there was no place for me, that I was unnecessary. Today, Mark tried to erase me completely, to lock me in a psychiatric ward so he could take my money, and you're asking me to forgive him. Do you even understand what you're asking for? You're asking me to spare the man who tried to destroy me. But Mom, we're family. Family doesn't drug you to steal your money, Emily. Family protects one another. I'm protecting this family, protecting you, even if you're too blind to see it." I took a thick manila envelope from my purse. "What's that?" she asked, wiping her tears. "Reality, the full truth." I handed it to her. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first paper was Dr. Anderson's psychiatric certification, signed that morning, notarized, confirming I was fully competent and mentally sound. She read it quietly, then looked up, pale. "You knew they were going to try this?" "Of course. I know you, and I know Mark's greed. I was ready." "What's this one?" she asked, pointing to the next document. My revised will. Signed and notarized 2 hours ago. She read the title, her eyes widening. Mom, you disinherited me. Not entirely, I corrected. But I removed your control. All assets are now in an irrevocable trust. She flipped through frantically. Primary beneficiary, Sam. Management board, independent trustees. She looked up, horrified. Mom, that means we won't see a single dollar. Mark was counting on that money to cover his secret debts. Bingo, I said. Gambling debts? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Madeline quickly took notes. Emily covered her mouth, realizing her mistake. Stop lying. I know the office on Central Avenue was just a front. I know Mark owes dangerous people. He wasn't desperate because of the party, he was desperate to save his own skin. And you knew, or at least suspected, but you looked the other way so you could keep playing the perfect wife. Emily collapsed into the chair, sobbing. I'm scared, Mom. The debts are bad. If Mark stays in jail, they'll come for us for the house. Not the house, I said firmly. The house is mine. Tomorrow I'm hiring private security. You and Sam will be safe as long as you stop protecting a criminal and start acting like a mother. What about Mark? Mark stays where he is. It's safer for him there. His creditors won't reach him easily. You should thank me, I just saved his life. Emily stared at me, both afraid and astonished. She had never seen me like this. I don't recognize you, she whispered. That's your mistake. You never wanted to know me. You only saw what you needed. But this is me, the woman who raised you and will save your son, even if it means going through you to do it. The door opened, and a sweaty young man with a cheap briefcase stepped in, probably a court-appointed lawyer or an old friend of Mark's. Ma'am, I represent Mr. Mark. We'd like to negotiate. Madeline stopped him. There's nothing to negotiate. My advice: tell your client to plead guilty and cooperate with the prosecutor for a reduced sentence. With this evidence, a trial could mean years in prison for attempted unlawful restraint. He looked at us both, sighed, and nodded before leaving. The room was silent again, not tense this time, but like the calm after a battle. I placed my hand on Emily's shoulder. She stiffened but didn't pull away. You have two choices, I said. You can keep crying over a husband who dragged you into ruin, or you can stand up, wipe your tears, and learn what real work looks like. The trust will give you a monthly allowance enough to live. If you want more, you'll have to earn it. Earn it? Work, real work. At the bakery, starting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., in the administrative department. I'll hire a reliable nanny and pay her. You show up or you deal with your debts and your husband in jail. Emily looked at Sam sleeping peacefully in her arms. She knew she had no other choice. All right, Mom, she whispered. I'll come. I walked out of the police station, breathing in the cool night air. Madeline walked beside me, looking pleased. She said I had handled it brilliantly, a perfect checkmate that turned the would-be queen into a pawn. I shook my head, saying I'd never wanted that. Madeline understood. Sometimes, to save the body, you have to cut away the rot. We got into a taxi. As the car rolled away, I looked back through the rear window. Emily stood alone under the neon light outside the station, small and fragile, waiting for a ride. Gone was the arrogance of the woman who once slammed a church door in my face. She looked like someone waking from a long coma. Mark was behind bars. My assets were safe. My daughter would have to earn her own living. I turned on my phone. Hundreds of notifications appeared. News of Mark's arrest in the neighborhood had spread. They were calling it a scandal. I didn't feel shame. I felt proud. Let them talk. Let them know that with Kelly, the woman who built an entire bakery empire, no one gets to look down on her. The driver asked where we were headed. I checked the time, 9 p.m., the longest day of my life. I told Madeline to take me to dinner. I was starving and wanted to raise a glass. Not for victory, but for the future. For the first time in a long while, my grandson's future didn't depend on luck, it was in my hands. The taxi sped into the city lights. I closed my eyes and smiled through the exhaustion. I had reclaimed my place not at a party where they didn't want me, but at the head of the table of my own life, where I had always belonged. Yet I knew the story wasn't over. Mark wouldn't stay quiet forever, and Emily would have to prove whether she truly carried my blood. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., the real test would begin a transformation. They say to make good bread, you need 3 things: strong flour, live yeast, and most importantly, time. You have to be patient, let the dough rise, let it mature before it faces the heat. Rush it, and you end up with something hard and bitter. Raising a child is the same, and sometimes, as with Emily, you have to start kneading all over again when you thought the job was done. Tuesday morning, the day after Mark's arrest, the alarm rang at 4:30. The city was still asleep, but bakers like me were already awake, feeling the cold, knowing the day waits for no one. I put on the white uniform I hadn't worn in years, tied my hairnet, slipped on non-slip shoes, and went downstairs. I didn't drink coffee, my stomach was too tight with anticipation. Would she come? I had made it clear. 6 a.m. at the production floor. 1 minute late, and she'd be locked out. I arrived at the main bakery a little after 5. The smell of yeast and vanilla embraced me like an old memory. I greeted Frank, the head baker who had been with me for 30 years, his arms tanned from the ovens, his heart pure gold. He was surprised to see me wearing an apron. I told him we had a new employee, a trainee, and I wanted to supervise personally. Close to 6, I stood beside the time clock. Workers entered for their shifts. I checked my watch. No sign of her. A flicker of disappointment crossed my chest. Maybe she wouldn't come. Maybe she was too proud, willing to sink rather than get her hands dirty. Just as the second hand neared the mark, I saw Emily step out of a taxi at the gate. No heels, no designer dress. She wore old jeans, a white t-shirt, sneakers. Her hair was hastily tied back, her face bare, pale, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept all night. She ran in, breathing hard, glanced at the clock, then at me. I stood there with my arms crossed. "You're 30 seconds late," I said coldly. Emily swallowed hard, eyes glistening but no tears. She began to explain the taxi was late, Sam was fussy. I raised my hand. Dough doesn't care about excuses. When timing's off, the batch fails. Deliveries don't wait, or customers miss breakfast. Here, you're not the owner's daughter. You're a sanitation and packing worker. Your shift starts now. I told her to clock in and follow Frank. She stood still a moment, torn. One part of her wanted to turn around, scream, and run. The other, the part that had seen her husband in handcuffs and her bank account empty, knew this was her only lifeline. She lowered her head. "Yes, ma'am." The time clock beeped, marking the start of her new life. The first weeks were hell for her, and in a way, for me, it hurt to see her sweeping flour from the floor, lifting heavy boxes, breaking a nail, finishing shifts with an aching back and swollen feet. The workers whispered. I told them everyone here was equal. Work builds dignity, and she needed to learn that. Emily cried in the restroom, I heard her, but every time she came back, washed her face, put on her cap, and kept packing bread. At first, she worked with resentment. But gradually, the exhaustion of real labor quieted her mind. When your muscles ache from honest work, there's no energy left for pride or appearances. A month later, the first change appeared. That day, the bakery was frantic, a dough mixer jammed. The technician wouldn't arrive for hours, and an urgent order for a hospital was due. Frank was panicking. I was in my office when I saw Emily approach the machine. She said the problem was digital, a software glitch, not mechanical. Frank dismissed her, but she persisted, saying she'd watched how it worked and read the manual in English. Emily opened the control panel, checked her phone, and entered a series of commands. Seconds later, the machine beeped, and the motor roared to life. The whole bakery went silent. Frank's jaw dropped. Emily stood up, brushed flour off her knees, and smiled a shy, genuine smile. Frank slapped her on the back, saying she'd saved the day. I saw my daughter blush with pride. For the first time in her life, she was praised for what she did, not for what she wore or owned. My heart swelled. The yeast was starting to rise. While Emily wrestled with dough, Mark's case advanced relentlessly. Madeline showed no mercy. I visited him only once, months later. Through the bulletproof glass, he looked thinner, head-shaved, eyes like a cornered animal. He begged me to withdraw the charges, promised to disappear. I felt no hate, no pity, just indifference. I pressed a paper against the glass, a copy of the divorce decree. I told him Emily had signed willingly and was seeking full custody of Sam. With an attempted unlawful restraint charge, the judge would grant it. Mark pounded the glass, shouting that Emily couldn't do this, that she needed him. I told him he was mistaken, he had only ever been decoration. Now she was learning how to be a woman. I left the prison and stepped into the sunlight, knowing that door had closed forever. The poison had been cut out of my family. Several months passed. Emily was still working at the bakery and had been promoted to logistics supervisor. She had a natural talent for organization and supplier relations. The assertiveness she once used to snap at waiters was now used to negotiate flour prices and manage delivery routes. But the biggest change wasn't her job, it was her life. She moved out of the mansion. One afternoon, while drinking coffee in my kitchen, she told me the house felt too big and empty, filled with fake memories. She had found a small 2-bedroom apartment near the bakery, modest, manageable, and fully paid for with her own salary. I stood up and kissed her forehead. I told her I was proud. She cried, apologizing for everything, for leaving me out of the christening, for being blind. I hugged her and told her it was all behind us. Forgiveness doesn't come from words, but from actions, and she had earned it herself. Sam's first birthday arrived. 1 year old. It felt like a century had passed since that disastrous baptism. This time, the celebration wasn't held at a fancy event center, but in my own backyard. There weren't 150 guests, just around 40. There were my closest friends, the women who had stood by me through every storm: Madeline, Sophia, Frank and his wife, a few of Emily's bakery colleagues, and some relatives truly worth keeping. There were no extravagant menus or glamorous influencers. Just a classic American backyard barbecue, hot food, cold beer, fresh lemonade, and of course, a big birthday cake, made by Frank and decorated by Emily. I sat in a garden chair, watching my grandson struggle to hit a birthday balloon while his mother helped him. Sam laughed out loud. Emily laughed too, her face smudged with frosting, hair loose, wearing a simple floral dress that made her look 10 years younger and 1,000 times more beautiful than the day she stood outside that church. Suddenly, Emily asked everyone to quiet down. She held a glass of water and gently tapped it with a spoon. Her voice trembled slightly as she said she wanted to share a few words. The garden fell silent. She looked for me in the crowd. She said that a year ago, she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She had cut out the most important person from it. She once said there was no place for me, believing one's place was measured by chairs, tables, and status. Emily paused and took a deep breath. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Then she said that this year, she finally understood. A mother's place isn't on a chair, it's in the foundation. My mother, Kelly, didn't just give me life. She saved it. She taught me that when you fall, don't wait for someone to lift you, stand up yourself. She taught me that money can be lost and earned again, but dignity is never for sale. Emily walked toward me. My throat tightened. In front of everyone, she called me Mom and said I had built the ground she now stood on, the roof that sheltered her and her son. And as long as she lived, there would always be a place for me at her table, in her home, and in her heart. I was the guest of honor in her life. I stood up, leaning on my cane, and we embraced. A long, tight hug that mended every crack in our bond. I heard my friends applauding. I saw Frank quickly turn away, wiping a tear with his apron. Sam crawled over and hugged my leg, asking to be picked up. I lifted him with Emily's help, and the three of us, 3 generations, stood together in the middle of the garden. I looked at the clear blue sky and thought of my husband. Do you see this, my love? We did it. Nothing was truly lost. We straightened the tree again. The party lasted until evening. There was music, laughter, the real kind, no posed photos for social media, but moments carved deep into memory. When everyone left, Emily and I cleaned up together because now she no longer let me do everything alone. I sat on the porch, opened my phone, and looked at the trust account still intact and growing. Then I looked at my wallpaper, a selfie from that afternoon, me, Emily, and Sam, our noses covered in frosting. That was my real fortune. I had started this story feeling invisible, unwanted, old. There was no place for me, they said. That sentence could have broken me, could have pushed me into a corner to fade away in bitterness. But I turned it into fuel. I proved that age isn't a punishment, it's a rank. Older women aren't disposable. We are the architects of survival. We hold the blueprints, the keys, and when challenged, we have the right to open or close any door we choose. Now, every morning when I walk into the bakery and see my daughter leading her team, see my grandson growing up safe and loved, I know my legacy is secure. I didn't just reclaim my place, I redefined my kingdom. My name is Kelly, 68 years old. And if anyone ever says there's no place for me, I'll smile and say, be careful. This world belongs to me. I'm just letting you borrow it. And that's the sweetest truth of all, sweeter than any loaf fresh out of the oven. Where are you listening to this story from? In your kitchen, on your way home, or in a quiet night looking for a bit of peace? If you can, share your thoughts below. Every story shared helps us understand each other better, learn from one another more deeply. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through more stories about family, tough choices, and the lessons that shape us, stay here. We're not just listening to stories, we're growing together through the things we've lived.